Hey everyone, check this out. We've got a Moka Pot and a French press, both quite different but very classic coffee brewers, and we're gonna put them head to head. So a few years ago, I did make a video comparing a French press with a Moka Pot, not these exact ones, but it seems like quite a few people did find it helpful. And since I've learned a lot since then, and I've gotten this little modern take on these brewers, I even had a chance to put them to the test on my two wheels. And so I thought, why not? Let's revisit these classics that are found in homes around the world, but maybe not yours because you're still struggling on which one should you buy. Well, you don't have to choose because they are quite different brewers. You can have both of them. So today what I want to do is walk you through how to make coffee, how to make a great coffee with both of these brewers. What are the unique benefits of each? The key differences. We'll dive a little bit into the history as well. And then I will wrap it up with my final thoughts on which one I prefer and what you might prefer. So first off, why are these two brewers so freaking popular? You see them everywhere in all different types of shapes and sizes and colors. And I think that's mainly for two reasons. The first one is they've just been around for a long time. They played the long game. So the French press. This was originally invented and patented back in 1929 by an Italian designer named Attilio Calimani. Now, my first question was, why is it called the French press if it was invented in Italy by an Italian? But that has to do with the earlier renditions, which were actually developed in France in around 1852, but they were lacking some of the iconic spring action seal around the filter, and I guess the French connotation just kind of stuck. And as for the Moka Pot, this was actually invented in Italy as well by a guy named Alfonso Bialetti, and I'm sure you've heard the name Bialetti before. It's a big Moka Pot brand that's been around since 1933. So only 4 years after our friend Attilio with the French press. A lot of coffee action happening around this time. And this is obviously not the Bialetti. This is from a brand called Joy Resolve, but the functionality is more or less the same. And one key important note about the history and culture of the word mocha is it actually comes from the port city in Yemen named Mocha, where they used to export a lot of the world's coffee. So no, it is not based on the chocolate. It is a synonym for coffee. And as for the second reason, they're just very easy to use. The coffee basically brews itself. So let's make a coffee. We've got some coffee here from Kuru Kahveci Mehmet Efendi. This is a Turkish brand, but this is a really nice Nicaragua. It's already been pre-ground. We're just gonna keep things simple for us today. And that is kind of a nice segue into the topic of grind size, right? So a lot of people suggest use a very coarse grind size for the French press. I don't really think it's all that necessary, mostly because this filter right here, these holes are already much smaller than what your grinds are gonna be. It's only letting through the small fine particles, the sediment, which we'll talk about later. So use whichever grind size works for you, but I'm just gonna keep it simple. And I'm gonna weigh it out to 20 grams here because we're gonna do a 1:15 ratio. That's what I like in the French press. That's what I like from filter coffee in general. And we've got water here at 90 degrees Celsius. So let's just set the timer, pour in till we get to 300 mils for this little brewer here. Here we go. What I like to do is just give it a quick swirl, or you can use your spoon to push down any of the crust that's forming on the top before brewing. And then also one last time before pressing. So while that brews, let's prep our Moka Pot. All right, so this one's kind of cool. It's got like a glass top so you can see all the coffee. And one key tip that I do use for the Moka Pot is to add boiling water, right? So a lot of people are just adding cold water, and that's more the conventional way, but I do feel like there's a lot of logic to adding hot water to your, I don't need to put this on a scale, to your Moka Pot. And the reason for that is that once you put it on the flame or your heat source or whatever it is, you're not wasting a lot of time heating the coffee grounds that are in here, which we're gonna put in over top of the water in just a second. So if it's already quite hot, we want to fill right up to the middle of this valve here. Not anymore. If it's already quite hot, it's just going to start brewing faster and it's not going to heat up the coffee that's in here. So you can measure this out. Maybe we'll do that just to show you, but you're already gonna fill this up, and I usually don't do anything more fancy than that. Again, you can play around with the grind size if you want, but just to keep this simple today, let's pour our coffee in and get it all over the table. Now, I don't typically press it down either. I just kind of level it out. And that's around 23 grams of coffee. Now, it's going to change depending on the density of your coffee, what coffee you're using, etc. But this is, I think this is a good amount. But I wouldn't want to put it too much less or too much more. And then, after a quick vacuum, keep your station clean, we're going to use our cloth, because otherwise you're gonna get burnt. So just use your cloth to hold the bottom and then twist the top on. All right, now let's run to the kitchen to pop this on the stove while this finishes brewing. And while that gets going on the stove, we can't forget to press this down. We're at around 402. So the first thing I wanna do is push down or swirl any of the remaining crust, if there is any, maybe there isn't. And then that's gonna make it much easier for us to do a slow, even press. You don't wanna force it. It's not really about pressure at all. It's more just separating the coffee grounds from the coffee liquid. And then pour it right into our cup. And I actually wanna measure this, and I'll tell you why in just a second. All right, so I've got around 260 milliliters of coffee in this cup. Put that to the side, and let's go check on our Moka Pot. Let's measure this out as well. I'm using these fancy glasses just so we can see some of the visual aspects as well, because that's also important. Getting a little bit of dripping here. So that came out to roughly 240 milliliters. But let's put those to cool on the side for a bit before digging in. And let's talk benefits, because that's what we're here for. Actually, let's put these on this side so we don't lose track of which one was which. As mentioned, there are quite different ways of making coffee. So why would you choose one over the other? Well, I just showed you with the French press, for example, it's just very easy. You just put the coffee grounds in, put hot water on top. Hopefully you're setting a timer just to control the extraction a little bit. Also the water temperature, you don't want it too hot. And there you go. In terms of the results, just objectively, it will have a little bit more of that grittiness because of the filter that we're using. Of course, you can get other more fancy French presses. I've seen them go up to around $100 to brew a coffee that is much more smooth and more refined. So if you want to go that way, go for it, try it out. But just to keep things simple, that's what you're gonna get. It's gonna be more opaque, I would say. They're both quite thick, but there's gonna be a lot of suspended solids, very fine particles in the French press. But it's just low maintenance. You leave it there for 4 minutes, you press it down, pour it in the cup. Now, as for the Moka Pot, as you just saw, it's still easy, but it involves a few more steps. You've got to take a few things apart. And if you're going to use the boiling water method, hot water here, you got to use a cloth. Once it's on the stove, though, it's pretty low maintenance. You do have to keep an eye on it, but it's not as risky as, for example, a Turkish coffee, where it might overflow and get all over your stove. This, once it's done, it just starts sputtering, and you want to make sure that you take it off before it starts to burn. In terms of the cup itself, in our case today, and every Moka Pot is going to be slightly different in how it brews, but as I mentioned, this has given me a really big yield, 240 milliliters. Now it's less than what we had over here. This, as I mentioned, was a 1:15 ratio. And the reason why I measured them out is because I wanted to do a simple calculation of what are the ratios compared. So in terms of how strong is your coffee? This one, as we mentioned, 1:15. I got 20 grams to a yield of 260 milliliters, which we measured based on the 300 milliliters of water that we put in originally. So 40 gram retention. And then this one, I don't know exactly how many grams of retention there were because we didn't measure the water that went in the bottom. But when we measured, we got 240 milliliters, which means if we do a quick calculation, now this is gonna be easier because we measured the yields. So what we're gonna do is 260 divided by 20, all right? So we got a 13. Let's just keep that number there, 13. And then for this one, we got 240 divided by 23, if you remember my dose over here. So that's 10, 10.4. This one's just slightly more watery. Keep that in mind. You're getting a more concentrated brew here. So let's taste. Now we've had after a bit of my rambling, we've had some time for these to cool down. Okay. Gonna prime the palate first. Yeah. What's happening here? The French press, to me, with this coffee, it's just a little bit hollow. Okay, so I'm lacking a little bit of the complexity, whereas I come over here, and assuming we did everything right, we didn't, leave it sputtering on the stove for too long, and we didn't leave it cooking while the cold water was heating up. We used boiling water and everything. This one just has more of that rich nuttiness that's nice in this type of a coffee. Again, comes down to which type of coffee you're using, which roast you're using, which origin, that kind of thing. But this just has a more variety of different notes, and I just find that this one is just more plain. But that could change as it drops in temperature as well. It's definitely worth trying different coffees for you, and that's what I want to mention here. So for me, I actually prefer in the Moka Pot using slightly more medium to dark roast, not black oily roasts, but something on the more developed side that brings out those more nuanced notes at a higher concentration, which we just showed here. Whereas for the French press, I think that you could actually work with lighter roasted coffees. You could also try grinding a little bit coarser, a little bit finer, play around. But I would say the notes that are coming out of this, you might want a little bit more of a fruity coffee or even a floral coffee. The one last thing I will say about the French press in some of my reflections in terms of why it's more common to use a coarser grind is basically just the functionality in some ways, right? Because when you're pushing this down and you have a finer grind coffee, it's gonna add more resistance as opposed to a coarser ground. Or if anyone's ever used tea in a French press, you'll notice it's extremely easy to press down because there's basically no grind size, it's just tea leaves. So that can be one consideration. If you wanna make it easier on yourself to press down, you could use coarser grind coffee, but if in a pinch, it's not the most crucial thing in my opinion. You might have a different opinion, leave that in the comments, I would love to hear it. Just lastly, very quick, I'm gonna tell you about the cleaning. I highly recommend cleaning both of these well. I always hear these kind of like old wives' tales or these folklore that you gotta never clean it, that you should just let it, that's not seasoning it, that's letting it develop mold and letting the coffee go rancid, and all those oils are sticking onto every single part of this brewer. So if you want good tasting coffee, you want clean equipment, and that goes for both. Just practically speaking, you can use a sieve, one of those kind of tea filters or colander type things. Fill this up with water again once you take the plunger off, and just pour it through and then dump that in the garbage or the compost or whatever. Some people like to throw it down the drain, but I'm not gonna tell you one way or the other. Maybe it cleans out the pipes. And then this one, it's actually kind of fun. And so you just remove this. You can kind of use your fingernails. It's not always that easy. So now you can see this nice dry coffee puck. And you can take this knock box or whatever straight into the compost. There you go. You can also just do it like this, but it's fun. It's like a little flute. And don't forget to tell me which one of these works best for you. Which one are you gonna pick up? Or if you have them already, which one do you use more regularly? And I'd love to take a deeper dive into the history and the stories behind both of these brewers. I kind of skimmed over it today just for practical purposes, but if you like this video, hit that like button just to let me know that you're interested, and I will do my best to cover that next time around. Don't forget to subscribe, and see you out there.